from just outside the Empire City at the crossroads to the northeast. Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, wherever you are and whenever you are. This is your premier podcast for all things unknown, not media, and I'm your host, JP. Welcome to our second episode of Not Media. This is your host, JP. I'm here today with a very special guest. His name is Stephen Bassett, and he's the executive director of the Paradigm Research Group, founded in 1996 to end a government-imposed embargo on the truth behind extraterrestrial-related phenomena. He has spoken to audiences around the world about the implications of disclosure, which, for those of you who do not know, is the formal confirmation by the heads of state of an extraterrestrial presence engaging in the human race. And last I checked, I don't know if this is an accurate number, but the number is ever climbing. Steve has done over 1,200 radio and news interviews regarding disclosure and his effort to see the fruition of disclosure. Is that about correct, Steve?
It's hard to get the actual number, but it's definitely moving toward the 1,500 zone.
Okay, great. So just starting off then, thank you again for coming on Not Media. I appreciate it. And just start off, take me back. So I know 1996 is the date that you started the Paradigm Research Group. What were you doing? Because I'm interested because, you know, you've been a big influence, and I think a lot of people, when I first got into UFO research back in the 2007 time, when I first kind of found out about all this was going on with the cover up and the UFO sightings and just everything related to the topic, I was looking for an outlet when I thought that, you know, there should be some sort of a formal disclosure, and I quickly found there was not very many places to go, and you were one of the only people out there doing, you know, anything minus Stephen Greer. You were one of the only people that were, you know, having a concerted effort to get disclosure formally from the United States government about this matter. So I'm just curious, what did you do? Like, what type of career were you working before 1996 when you started the Paradigm Research Group? Let's say your education and the type of work that you did that led up to the advocacy work that you then got involved with the Paradigm Research Group.
This is a classic case of a second life. It's a gift.
Okay.
Most people don't get a second life. They establish a career, they create a family, and they go through that process, and that's it. But some people have a second life. For instance, they might be a corporate executive for most of their career, and they retire maybe at 55 or 60 with a lot of money and take up art. And the next thing you know, they're very good at it, and they're having gallery showings and what have you. That would be a classic example of a second life. And a lot of people have those, but it's not a lot. I mean, but I say a lot. It's not obviously a great number, but certainly it is something that can happen, and it's a gift. In my case, I studied physics in college, got a degree in that, but quickly realized that I didn't have the drive, or maybe even the IQ, to be a really good physicist. I would have been a really average physicist. More importantly, it was tumultuous times. I graduated. I went to school in '64, and I finally got out in '70. I got drafted along the way. It was a tough 6 years, and you don't recall, but I do very well. That was the Vietnam War, which yes.
Oh wow! So you were drafted.
No, I was drafted.
Did serve?
I did not serve.
Okay.
I was opposed to the war, to say the least, and was involved in some anti-war stuff. Not enough, frankly. But so these were tumultuous years, and a lot of people lost their way. What does life mean? What is the country all about? And of course, a lot of the men that went and served in Vietnam, okay, fine. They came back though, and been carrying for decades tremendous trauma and upset from that. So again, I'm not complaining. It's just that's kind of what happened. And derailed me. And so I just went off and doing stuff, nothing of significance. But I knew that I did have some abilities, and I knew the importance of having a purpose in life, and I hadn't had it. And slowly, it sort of started to develop that I probably was an activist at heart. Uh, and long story short, I was in San Luis Obispo doing some consulting work for a company that meant nothing but paid a little money. That ended. But while I was there, because of the movie Schindler's List, I joined Amnesty International, small chapter there in San Luis Obispo, and I came up with an idea: why not show Schindler's List as a special showing to raise money for Amnesty International chapter there in San Luis Obispo? Okay, one of the theaters donated space. We got the film, and we showed it. At the and I saw it the second time. I'd already seen it, but in the beginning, I made an announcement and made a statement to the people in the audience, and something clicked in my head. I think it was like, this is what I should be doing. Uh, and it took a while for that to simmer. But then when the job went away, I was confronted with more of the same, more of the same. I made the decision: look, I'm 49. If I'm going to have purpose in my life, it better start right now, or there won't be. And so I started to think that way. And as it happened, I had read a number of books on the subject, but at the same time that that was going on, I read John Mack's book, Abduction: Human Encounters with Aliens. And this was a huge paradigm shift for me. He was an amazing man, a Pulitzer Prize winner, Harvard professor, who was putting everything on the line to try to investigate this appropriately, and wrote this amazing book. I also learned that it held a symposium at MIT. The camp hosted it, didn't endorse it. And I'm thinking, this is a groundbreaking man. This is an extraordinary thing. This issue is happening. It's coming around. I've always known the ETs were here. Just said, so what? I knew that when I was a kid, teenager, just reading the news and seeing various things that would turn up, like the Betty and Barney Hill article in Look magazine. And I'm going, yeah, they're here. And one day the government will tell us, I'm sure. Well, the government didn't. And so I said, this is it. And I got lucky. At the back of the book was the address and phone number for his organization in Cambridge. And so I said, what the hell? One of the things I've learned late in life, I sure wish I had thought this way and learned this younger in life. There's nothing you can't get involved in if you're willing to volunteer. If you're chasing a paycheck, the things you can get involved in is narrowed down 98%, right? And so I offered to volunteer, and they said, okay. And I left everything, put everything up for sale, whatever, and drove across country to spend 4 months as a volunteer for John Mack's organization. So that was a good, exciting opening. It was very fortunate for me. So high end, sophisticated. I'm going, okay, I'm really feeling cool, but I wasn't really able to do enough work or do anything that would warrant a salary. And so my time was going to come up, and I would have to leave. And it was during that point that it hit me. It just hit me like a flash. I was sitting in the office there in Cambridge, and I've said this story many times, but again, there's only so many people watch a podcast, so I'll say it as many times as necessary. It occurred to me, the problem is not science. I mean, John is trying to do science. He's trying to get these articles out, and they're resisting it, and they won't publish. And I'm going, there's enough science out there to prove the ET presence 100 times over. So why isn't it fully acknowledged? Why isn't the government, have a Secretary of Extraterrestrial Affairs? Politics. The decision to embargo this issue, as I came to call it, was a political decision for national security reasons. And therefore, it wanted to solve the problem of what does the government know, or what is the truth of this? It has to have a political solution. And that really was not being pursued. There was no money in it. It was still a stigmatized matter. Over the years, you had some efforts going all the way back to Keogh to try to convince some politicians to pay attention. None of them went anywhere, but there was some effort. Stephen Schiff made a move in 1993-4. and so forth. But overall, there was no defined activist movement. And so I said, well, uh, that's it, because I knew Washington well because my family has been living in the metro area since 1916. So I'd been in and out, worked there, knew my way around. And so I said, what if I went back to the DC area? I have a relative there. I can stay. What if I registered as a lobbyist? I'll bet I'll be the first one. And I was. So I arrived on July the 4th, 1996. Within a week, I had filed the papers to be a lobbyist for be a lobbyist, just a registered lobbyist, House and Senate, standard stuff. It's not a big deal. It's easy. It doesn't cost anything. However, this is Washington D.C. I'm not living in Connecticut or Missouri. I'm in D.C. and I knew that the Post checked all the lobbying registrations because that was potential news. Any number of registrations could turn up that would be quite interesting, and so they would check them. And I knew that when they saw mine, they couldn't resist, and that's exactly what happened. It was late in '96, early 97. They saw that registration and sent a reporter out to where I was living, and in my attic office, and interviewed me for about an hour. And they published in the front page of the business section, 1997, early 77, which is like the number 2 page in the Washington Post. And this is print days, right? All these sections, the business section was number 2. And so to get a huge article from that section with a huge photograph, though it was an awful photograph, launched my career. Suddenly I'm the UFO lobbyist. And that's how it began in 1996.
Wow, that's a great story, and I know there is no, I believe that for sure, that there is no better life than a life of service. So, the fact that you made that decision, that's a bold decision to dedicate your life to something that at the time you were just a volunteer for, but ultimately you're volunteering for a greater good, and that's for the I know I've heard you speak about it before, and I just kind of just to tell the audience some of the benefits that the public, would have if disclosure did happen is, a release or some sort of concerted effort, maybe to get some sort of classified technology and technology regarding anything having to do possibly with crash retrievals, maybe into the public domain, which would benefit the general public instead of having this being a classified only
There are a lot of benefits,
topic, or
but
only benefiting
they're subtle
the
or
war
complicated,
or wars.
and nobody wants to hear them, right? Because it's ETs, right? It's ETs, and there's no ETs. The government told us there was no ETs, so there can be no benefits from learning about something that doesn't exist. And so, the activist movement was to end the embargo, as I came to call it, on this issue. And the government would simply confirm that the government had no trouble confirming that they ultimately they'd built these atomic bombs. They had no trouble confirming they built ICBMs and other things that they've done, all of which threaten our very existence. But this issue was more than they could handle. And so they embargoed it. The term disclosure emerged in the late 80s. Stephen Greer really is the one that put that term into play, the late 80s, early 90s. But he called one of the organizations he set up Disclosure Project. But I'm pretty sure that he was using the term, though the name Disclosure Project was a proper name, but he was using the term in the small d disclosure format, meaning the disclosure process, the process of revealing and disclosing stuff. And that's what he was going to do. He's going to reveal and disclose stuff, which comes under the heading of research and so forth. In 2000, I made my second contribution to the language, which is very important. And I said, no, disclosure, the activist movement needs a prize. It needs a goal. If you don't have a clear goal and you're trying to get thousands, hundreds of thousands, or millions of people to pay attention to you, why should they? And so if you look at all the successful activist movements in history, they all had defined goals. Classic example, end prohibition. Real simple. The government ends prohibition, you win, right? Civil rights, Civil Rights Act was certainly had to have that before anything else. When the Civil Rights Act was passed, that activist effort won. Then, of course, then they moved on to other areas of injustice, but there was a defined goal. They got that goal. Anti-war activism. You win when the war ends. The idea is to end the war. The anti and in some cases, though, it's not really a win because the war went on as long as it was going to go on, and you maybe didn't even affect it, but you tried. So, but these are easy to find goals. The ET issue didn't have any of that. What was it? Prove it? All right. If the goal was to prove it, we'd already proven it 10, 20 times. So that's not working. So the goal was simply this: disclosure, capital D. The heads of state of nations have got to confirm the truth. Once they do that, confirm the presence of ETs, then the ability to investigate, really cover, research, engage, expand, the whole planet will have the opportunity to go after this issue without the stigma. And that particular truth, with all its profundities, would now be in the lexicon of truths. But the fact that some private citizens say that, that's not the same thing. Even some members of government could say that. So what? Until the president says it, the doors don't open. It's a lot of things are that way. People don't like government. They don't want the president to do anything. Well, good luck with that, folks. But say you want to go to war. You don't like some country want to go to war. So you go out there and you say people have to go to war. We're going to go to war. Is the country going to go to war? No, it's not. You could be a member of Congress, want to go to war. Is the country going to go to war? No, not going to go. But when the president of the United States, right, goes to the Congress and formally asks for a declaration of war, and that declaration is given, guess what happens? The country goes to war. And I can list all kinds of things like that simply do not happen until there's government imprimatur. And the people that think that's not the way the world works, they're just living in a dreamland. And so the Civil Rights Act had to happen, and disclosure has to happen for this issue to finally move forward, as it should have in 1948 when President Truman had an easy call. All he had to do was just tell Roger Ramey, stall, maybe counter the narrative for a while, give us a couple of weeks to mull this over, and then come forward and announce to the world they have a crash vehicle of non-human origin. We would have had disclosure in 1948. That's all he had to do. And he chose to go another way and completely altered dramatically the entire second half of the 20th century.
Wow. Yeah, that is very true. And now this has been going on for, what did we just come up on the 75th anniversary of Roswell last year? So now we're coming up closer to 80 years of this cover up.
Embargo.
Just going
Not a
back.
cover-up.
Okay. Truth embargo.
I'm being correct, but it matters.
So, yes. Okay. So, and the difference between the two would be that it's the truth embargo. So the difference for the audience between just a cover-up and a truth embargo is that the truth embargo would be differing from the cover-up in the sense of...
In other words, the government is embargoing Cuba.
Okay.
But now some people think that's illegal. They shouldn't do it. But in fact, it's legal. And if you violate that embargo in some way, you can actually pay a penalty. Same thing with the ET issue. The government decision to embargo it, meaning we're not going to acknowledge it, and we may even suppress efforts to go there, just like they suppress anybody that wants to snoop around for nuclear weapon secrets. That's not going to go well. And that's an embargo, and that's legal. And the problem with cover-up, which was the phrase being used for years and years and years, is you're saying this policy is illegal, therefore everyone involved in it are criminals. And so if you're inside the government, being constantly referred to in a criminal way is not going to encourage you to be cooperative.
Yes. Okay. So it's only going to give you more pushback to say, hey, if we're not doing anything wrong in the first place, the way you're talking to us isn't going to get you any answers because you're asking the wrong questions. Yep. Okay. I also want to say, I know you said that you work with John Mack. Sorry about the untimely loss of your friend, because I know we lost John Mack. What was that, back in the 90s? Unfortunately.
2005.
Was it
2005?
it was 2005. Okay,
Mhm.
so that was a big loss because I am familiar with his work, and I also am familiar with the fact what was it? Harvard tried to. He was he a tenured professor at Harvard, and they tried
Well,
to get him out.
he was a famous man. He was a Harvard grad. He was the head of psychology at the Harvard Hospital in Cambridge. Uh, he was an important figure with a Pulitzer Prize.
Yeah,
So they ran him through the ringer because they were concerned that he was going to tarnish their their image. And it's a disgrace, which one day they should apologize for. But I'll tell you a little story about John. There's several things. There's several stories I have, but one is interesting, which still affects me to this day. Before I got into this field, I was doing various business stuff, which I didn't have a passion for. So, not surprisingly, I wasn't very good at it.
yeah.
But one of my jobs took me to a stint down in the Cayman Islands, which is a British protectorate. And so it was the first time in my life that I had ever been in a country that drove on the left side of the road.
Okay.
And the car steering wheel is on the right side of the car. You know what I'm talking about?
Yes.
But I'm going, okay, I can do this. Of course I can do this. And so I had a car. I was provided a car as part of the job. So it's like the third or fourth day that I am on the island. I go down to meet somebody for drinks at one of the beachside resorts. Big, dirt parking lot in front of it. You just kind of drive in. So we get done, and I go to leave, and I pull up to where the road is, right?
Yeah.
And I start to move forward. And in that instant, a truck, not a semi truck, but a truck, flies by at about 45 miles an hour, probably within 7 to 8 inches of my bumper.
Wow.
And the reason that happened is because I as an American, I looked left instead of right for oncoming traffic in my lane. Now, so okay, I react. You know how it is. You're startled, and then I pull off, and I'm heading down the left side of the road, and it took about a minute or two before the math hit me. See, if I had pulled out 1 second sooner, that truck would have hit my driver's side at 45 miles an hour without even braking. I would have been dead before I knew it. I came within 1 second of death. And that kind of got my attention and shook me up. And this was around 1987-ish, 86, 5, somewhere in that zone, mid 1980s. Okay, now, so 10 years go by, and I get into the field in 96. And after a number of years, I launched the X conference in 2004. So that's 8 years in. I'm starting to get my feet underneath me. And I knew there'd never really been an exopolitics conference in Washington. So I'm going to launch that. I actually did 6 of them. So the first one was kind of a big deal, nearly killed me, right? I've never held a conference before, but we had about 700 people. And so it was a well-received conference, went very well. I wanted John Mack to come to it naturally, but he demurred for a number of reasons. I think one was because brand new, not knowing who's going to be there, what to expect. He had been through the ringer, as you know earlier, but whatever. He just declined, no big deal. But I said that. But after the conference was successful, and it was, I said, I'll try again. And so I was about to invite him again to X Conference 2005 when I learned he had been killed. How did he get killed? It was late at night, probably 11-ish. He had been at a house giving a lecture, presentation to a bunch of people there in north of Highgate, North London. And he's walking back to the metro. And I know all of this in detail because I actually, on my last trip to UK, where I stayed 6 months, I actually went to the exact place he was killed. And I walked up to the road. I walked up to the crosswalk the way he did, only it's the middle of the day. And I looked to the right, and the road went downhill. It just kind of moved down and then started going downhill. and there were not houses to the right, it was trees. Now, to the left, there were houses. Right? There were no street lights. And so John came up to that intersection. He always wore a black suit, usually, always wore a black suit when he went to something. White shirt, though. He's standing there, but he's facing the road. So anybody coming up from the right it would have been hard to see him. They wouldn't pick up the white shirt because the white shirt was facing the road, not to the right. And so he simply stepped off that curb or off that sidewalk and looked left, not right, exactly like I
Like an
did
American.
in
Okay.
1985. And the truck, it's kind of a workman's truck, didn't even have a chance to brake. It hit him at probably 40 miles an hour, threw him 30 feet in the air. They say he was dead before he hit the ground.
Oh, that's terrible.
The driver was, all I can say is the driver had probably had a couple of drinks or beers at the pub, so he had some alcohol in his system. Therefore, there was a legal issue. It was clear to me that it wouldn't have mattered if the guy was stone cold sober. He had no chance. I think the family understood this as well, and so they actually formally requested that this man not be punished. And I believe he got some very minor punishment. But that is, I don't, that's a kind of synchronistic connection to things that gets your attention. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, yeah.
And after that happened, which is 2005, I've been back to London many times. But even in this country, when I cross the street, I look left and I look right every time. I don't just look one way, I look both ways. And hell, I'll even look behind me. So it's possible that John may have saved my life
My God.
simply
Yeah.
by that. Again, this is conjecture, but it's a connection to the man that I never would have thought would be the case. But that's exactly what happened.
Yeah. So again, definitely sorry about the loss of your friend. That's a terrible story, and that's big of the family that they would forgive the man who was involved with killing their family member and asking that he would not be held criminally negligible, even though he was drinking alcohol. So. Moving forward, just make a comment. I am familiar with the with Stephen Schiff. You had brought that up, and from my
Mm-hmm.
understanding, that was also one of the other efforts. I think that was 1993 that he attempted to go to the General Accounting Office and ask for information about Roswell. And my
Mm-hmm.
understanding is, because I'm going to talk about that later on the podcast, that he was stonewalled. So back in the 90s, that seems the only other effort by somebody, and I think he was a congressman at the time, right? And I think it was somewhere out in the Southwest.
It was
Uh,
worse than a stonewall. He was given the runaround. They would tell him to go to another entity, right?
yeah,
Go to the Air Force, go to the National Archives, and the National Archives would tell him to go somewhere else.
yeah, yeah.
He got pretty angry.
And eventually, like, they figure if you start spinning around enough, you're just going to give up. Like, hey, I can't go here, I can't go here. Yeah, so
That is the way things often happen. You're absolutely right. Um,
so not with you though, because you have not stopped on this effort. My follow-up question, you kind of already got into a follow-up question that, and you already stated that you started the X conference in 2004. You've had 6 X conferences since. I know I personally attended, which is, I think I may have met you in 2008, but I definitely attended the 2008 X conference, 2009 X conference, and that was when I first got into what at the time was the only outlet I wanted to get involved, and the only outlet at the time I could find was the X conference, and it was a very admirable effort. I believe it got a lot of attention. It was there was a lot of great guests. It was very professional. I remember George Norrie being at 2008. I remember meeting George Norrie in 2008. I actually shook his hand there. Um, I believe that was the X conference, because I definitely went to the X conference in 2008. And I remember meeting George Norrie right around there. So you
I
said
think you're
2000.
right. I think you're right about that. Yeah, and thank you for telling me that. Uh, you you anticipate that when you do things, it affects other people. You don't know how, and usually you're never going to know, but everything we do affects other people. And so, you give a conference and 200, 300 people show up, and in many cases, and I've been told this, it's changed your life. And then you find out much later, and obviously it's very, very gratifying to know that there was some impact of the event. Uh,
Yes. Thank you. I mean, from there, I've been to quite a number of your events, and I've traveled across the country, been to other events. I've researched this topic extensively, and it's got me involved for whatever level I could be at, and right now still working a career with the disclosure movement and with trying to get the truth further out to the public to further bolster this whole movement, which would put more pressure eventually onto the people in government to want to release more information. So back then in 2004, there was not a lot of support from the government. This must have been a difficult endeavor for you. Was this 100% funded and started by you, this X conference? Because that seems like it was a hard that would be a hard endeavor, because back then this was certainly, because even when I got involved, this was like anywhere that I would go to on an official level, everybody would just be like, oh, one of these guys, one of these alien UFO guys, and it was just like it just wasn't being taken serious, on certain levels, 20-25 years ago.
this is true. The stigma was obviously quite high when I entered the field in '96, and remains so. But in terms of the public, the growing interest in the public never stopped, and so every year there were more people interested, and so the conference was wonderful and fun to do. The government didn't give me a hard time. I didn't have any problems with that. Uh, I I actually paid all the speakers $1,000, which which was, you know which probably helped to get a lot of speakers, but still, so it ended up losing like $25,000. All 6X conferences lost money, and I'm not in business. I'm an activist. I'm not in business, though I am a sole proprietorship. That was for political reasons, but I am going to convert PRG to a nonprofit finally after 26 years, a little later this year, and allow people to donate for the first time with tax deduction. But the conference was fun. It was great. So what happens? 2 points that I'll make here. One, going back to something you said earlier, the activist path is not an easy path. I have two groups of individuals that are at the top of my list in terms of heroes. One is activists, and the other is journalists. There are such things as activist journalists, right? Kind of a combination. And so I have great appreciation for the great journalism and great activism. The activist path is the more difficult of the two. It's brutal in some ways. It can even be deadly. And so, for the vast majority of people, it just isn't an option. And that's perfectly appropriate. Uh, in my case, uh, it was like a gift in that my life had been, how would you say, much too, well, just not, my life was not coming together. I just didn't have purpose, and I didn't know what I wanted. And so I wasn't building anything. I wasn't going anywhere. Now, very few relationships of any kind. And so when I reached that point at 49, when I said it's either get busy living or get busy dying, to quote Andy Dufresne from one of the all-time great movies, right? Uh, the Shawshank Redemption.
Yes, yes, I'm familiar with that.
I had the good fortune of having no wife, no children, no business that had to be maintained. I was just a consultant guy, whatever, available. I had no barriers to just jumping into this. And after I did, the chances of any of those turning up became even less. In other words, Becoming a political activist on this issue in 1996 was not going to build a coterie of wealthy friends or suddenly find yourself in relationships of depth, anything like that. You're not going to make any money, though. Over the years, some people have figured out how to do that. It's not easy, but they have, and that's quite impressive. And so there was just no barriers. I was free. And I mean, you look at a lot of the activists in history, they have a lot. They give up a lot in order to be free to be able to do it, and that's part of the reason it's a difficult path. Though if it's your purpose, you're fine. There is the example. I mean, this is sort of relevant, but it was made a big deal in the movie. But as Gandhi got deeper and deeper into his activism uh, later in life, he he made an arrangement with his wife that there would be no conjugal engagements. They would give that up. That would all be given up because he did not. It was he did not want that complicating factor to interfere with his activism. It would be a distraction in a lot of ways. And so now, good idea, bad idea, I don't know, but it's symbolic uh, in a lot of cases. Uh, Again, you see activists are emerging out of people whose lives have not gelled, but are smart and have a sense of what's right and wrong. And these are the ones that end up carrying the water. Now, there are plenty of exceptions to that, but I'm just saying, if someone has a life like that, where it just didn't come together, and the you would normally expect to be doing, you're not doing, you don't have the accoutrements that a person of your age or intellect or education should probably have, and you're not happy about it, and believe me, you can get really unhappy about that.
Yeah, yeah, for sure.
Consider purpose. Say, look, I'm gonna pursue a purpose. Again, usually purpose almost always involves service, but not necessarily. Technically, purpose, regardless of how it's dealt with, is service of a kind. Some stuff is more obviously service, some less, but it is purpose. Consider that, because I'll tell you, it's something that we do not teach in our schools enough, or hardly at all. It's simply not a focus of our society. Our society is about people getting jobs, having careers, making money, and paying taxes. That's it. Purpose is not on the menu. This is a tragedy. We need to fix it. I don't know if it's fixable, but there is few things in this life in terms of personal satisfaction that compare with purpose. There are people that have unbelievable sums of money that are completely miserable. There are people that have 18 relationships going at the same time. They're miserable. Famous, miserable. And yet there are some basic people out there that have purpose in their life and they could not be happier. So it's just a little message I'm going to put out there.
Those are definitely wise words. Looks like in, what was it, 2014, that you had any initiative from the Paradigm Research Group to inject the ET question into the 2016 presidential election. So as far as your timeline goes of what you're satisfied with, do you feel that influenced the election, and do you feel that your timeline of what you want to have accomplished ultimately, is it a full truth? Is it something? Is it a partial disclosure? Is it limiting if there's some information right now being held that you find, what if there was some information out there right now being held that you feel maybe the public would find too shocking? I mean, should that still be withheld? It should be a full disclosure. And, where you at with as far as your timeline and as far as the influence that you may have had?
Let me simplify it for you. There is only one way this process that is underway can end. Only one way, period. The government, the United States president, either first or right after another head of state, one of the more advanced nations, powerful nations, has made the confirmation. or goes first. I would like to see the president go first. Confirms the extraterrestrial presence. Anything else is not acceptable. And so that's how it ends. That's disclosure with a capital D. Um, and anybody wants to substitute something for that, forget it. Once we get disclosure, our chances of getting a great deal more information and understanding go up exponentially. Until we get disclosure, we're going to continue to go round and round in circles like a race car driver with no finish line. And that's a waste of a life. In fact, one of the downsides of the whole truth embargo, one of its what I say detriments, significant detriment. It literally has wasted people's lives. It's like it's like calling somebody to jury duty, and they want to serve, they want to help. Okay, so they come in and you put them on the jury, and it's a 1 month trial, and so they have to give up a month of their life, and then you come up with a verdict, guilty, and then the government says, we're going to try it again, and so they force you to sit through another trial. And in fact, the person is guilty, but they just want to keep trying the person. They don't want to actually go anywhere beyond that. And so they just want to keep running the trial over and over and over again. And so you sit on that jury for years. You give up a lot of your life for years to retry over and over again a case that was already resolved the first time. Now, most people consider that to be a massive abuse, a sin, evil even. But that's exactly what the truth embargo has done. It's wasted people's lives pursuing evidence that the government was never going to accept regardless. And that's that. There will be apologies required at some point. I mean, I'm going to be generous, but I mean, there are worse things that governments could do, right? So on a list of things, how does the truth embargo and that detriment and other detriments stack up against what we did in Vietnam? It's not even close. What we did in Vietnam was an abomination. Uh, so I don't want to get overly bent out of shape. And people have good free will. I mean, they have the choice to say, look, the government's not going to yield on this. I'm not going to put any more time into it. I'm going to do something else with my life. And so they have that choice. Uh, but the issue is so powerful, so compelling that obviously it's not easy to walk away from, but that's not the government's fault per se. But they know what's going on. They understand it. They understand that people are spending years of their life trying to pursue something that the government will not allow. It would be the same thing if the government were to intervene, and this, of course, would be really a problem in some major medical science, like uh, some labs come up with a cure for cancer, and the government says, I don't think we're ready for that yet, so we're just going to classify that. And then so they continue to work and keep showing that, oh no, this works, and the government says, no, 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 I don't think so, and goes out of its way to make sure that nobody really catches on with that cure for cancer that came up. Now, if the government to do something like that, people could get really, really upset. And that would be an apology I don't know if they could even make. I mean, I think that's the kind of thing you should bring an entire government down, or not government down, but it would almost call for a complete overhaul of the state. I don't think they've done that. I hope to God they haven't.
Yeah.
But it's in that genre for those that are paying attention.
Oh, so all right, great. So thank you for clarifying that. That your end game is a formal disclosure from heads of state, president, stating that there is an extraterrestrial presence engaging the human race. So, and then once we hit that, moving forward, whatever revelations come out are most likely going to snowball, because once it's acknowledged by a formal government, then you're opening the door for more support of some of the projects that may have been going on in this country that have been, I'm not going to get too much into anything specific, just because there's so much, for anybody that wants to do the research. But there is just moving back a little bit, there is a project you mentioned, Stephen Greer, and a lot of people who look into this research are familiar with the National Press Club 2001 press conference for Disclosure Project that happened,
Mhm.
I believe, in May of 2001, shortly before 9/11, and then it kind of like the world stage took a different direction with the war in Afghanistan and the situation, the terrible situation that happened with the terrorist attacks on September 11th, 2001. Did you have any work with Stephen Greer, or I know he's a controversial figure. A lot of people who look deeply into it credit him for the disclosure movement in the early 2000s. But I also know that there's some people that shy away from his movement because of the CE5 initiative, which for those of the people listening that don't know what CE5 is, Close Encounters of the Fifth Kind, which is a protocol where through collective meditation and deep thought, people could actually draw in ET craft and communicate with them. I don't really want to get too much into that, but like I said, I know Stephen Greer is a polarizing figure to some. I've heard in different forums, the good work he's done, and I've also heard people shy away because of the C5 initiative and then other aspects of about him. Did you actually work with him at all, or have any help from him throughout the time that you were doing the X conference? Because it seems your timelines seem to be pretty close, but not exactly. Like he was in 2001 with his first press conference, and then you had the first X conference in 2004.
Well, first of all activists are polarizing. You can't be an activist and not be polarizing. That's point one. Point two, Dr. Greer has made enormous contributions to the, quote, disclosure process, including bringing that term into play. His CE5 work is what started it all for him. He's a contactee, which already makes him in a special category, right? In other words, his engagement starts and is driven by his personal experience as a contactee. I don't have that privilege, and a very smart guy. And so he comes to the government's attention in the '80s, late '80s, because he's a doctor. He has substantial funds and money, so he's a pretty substantial person. And so he had substantial friends and colleagues and connections. So he was taking some of these substantial people out to do CE5s, which is to essentially, and this is why it's a 5 level, call them in, right? Invite them in. So contact of the fourth kind is uninvited. Contact of the fifth kind is, no, you're inviting them in. And developing protocols to do that and so forth. And the fact is that there are now CE5 groups all over the world, because you can, in fact, do that. You can call them in, not all the time, but we know they're fully telepathic. And so you're thinking, meditating, whatever. And of course, you take out a laser light shining in the sky. It's not particularly difficult to see how that could develop into a protocol. The ETs do engage us in a number of ways. One of the most interesting to me is crop circles. Uh, some crop circles are made by humans, teams of students and things, no question, but there are plenty of crop circles that were not made by humans, I can assure you. And so if an extraterrestrial is willing to go to the trouble, for whatever reason, to put a crop circle down in not just anywhere, but in certain fields in the UK, and then do it again the next year. In other words, year after year after year, which is kind of making a statement there. It's like, hey, come back next year. I'll show you what we got. This is highly inciting, very stimulating. So it's encouraging engagement of the issue. So if they're willing to do that, the idea that they might engage some CE5 groups that are out somewhere away from ambient light and shining a laser into the sky and meditating, and doesn't shock me at all. And so he was doing that, and the government took notice. The government's going, what is going on here? So and so went out with who and did what, and so they decided. This is what I believe. I could be wrong, but I think that they decided, well, let's reach out to this man and see what's going on. And I think they did. And he started having meetings and talking with people in government. Uh, it gave him access in a sense. Okay. And he built on that. So there's almost nobody in the field that has done more work uh, of an activist nature than Greer. Uh, I'm not even close. Uh, and part of the reason is he had funds. He had funds from the beginning, and I started with nothing. But the point is that he's done a huge body of work, and the more you do, the more the opportunity you have to uh, create a problem for somebody or irritate somebody because they disagree with this, disagree with that.
Yes.
And so, yeah, you become controversial. But name a political activist that wasn't controversial. I'm not sure. You know,
Yeah.
look at Greta Thunberg. I mean, all she did was come forward as a kid saying, "I'd like to have a planet that's together," and she's been attacked and criticized worldwide for
Yeah.
years.
Yeah. It
Yeah,
doesn't. It sounds like not an easy business to be in. You're definitely going to rub somebody the wrong way when you take a stand in this world. That certainly sounds to be correct. Um, so moving forward, I'm just going to kind of just quickly try to sum up some of the things that have been going on in the national news, with the different programs, with the congressional hearing in May of 2022, with To the Stars Academy. So, we had ATIP, which is the advanced, what was that?
Advanced
A,
Aerospace Threat
yes,
Identification Project.
that's it. Advanced Aerospace Threat Identification Program. We had that from 2007 to 2012. Luis Elizondo then left that and he became a whistleblower. We had the UAP Task Force 2017 and 2020. Then we had Arrow, which eventually would be all domain. So they were saying, from space, from the sky, from the water. So we had an all domain anomaly resolution office fronted by Sean Kirkpatrick from 2020 till the present day. And then you have different sections of that, which in 2021, November, was the Airborne Object Identification Management Synchronization Group, AIMSOG. And then you also had the group that was managing AIMSOG, which is Airborne Identification and Management Executive Council, AIM Exec. And then those two groups turned into Arrow and Arrow Exec right now, which are the present day groups that are in Congress, at least, or the government that are looking into this. May 2022, we had the congressional hearings. And to sum up that, it was about an hour and a half long. I watched it and I tried to just take some main key points from what was said during the May 2022 congressional hearings. And it's now sighting based, and it really ignored some of the stuff beyond or earlier than 2004 as far as this congressional hearing, trace cases, crash retrievals, any of the research that many notable researchers have been doing for decades. They didn't really get into that in the 2022 congressional hearings. The example they showed was kind of laughable. They were trying to almost like they were trying to downplay the matter. I remember, I think they showed like an orb and like a snap of a finger that kind of shot across the camera, and they said, "Oh no, this is the majority of our sightings." So it seemed like they were going with like some of the low hanging fruit during that conference.
JB, let me help here. You might as well be trying to describe the Civil War. You're talking about a massive amount of things that have been happening. Uh, let's let's simplify a little bit. Two things. Uh, one, uh, on my website, paradigmresearchgroup.org. In fact, let me see if I can. Let me see if I can. I'm not used to this platform, but let me see if I can make it work on a share. I'll show people this, and then let me know if it's working. Ooh, is that okay? Here we go. Just a second. Give me just a second. We got about 25 minutes to go, so we're good. Let's see, because I need to do more of this. I do all these podcasts, but I don't share enough on them, right? This is a very significant function. So let's see. Got this. All right. Now, what I'm going to do is I'm going to come back to the podcast and I'm going to go to share. Okay, here we go. I'm clicking on that. Now, if I'm not mistaken, I'm now sharing with you.
Yes.
Oh, that's right. I'm sorry. It's okay. It's okay. Look, here's the deal. I just forgot. We're audio only. What I just brought up is my Paradigm Research Group.
I will leave a
page.
link for on the description
Yeah.
for the podcast. I'll leave a link to your Paradigm Research Group.
And in the right side of the menu is resources, and you hover over that, and it gives you a menu, and you scroll down to Print Media Archive. You click on that.
Okay, I could see that.
And when you click on that, you get a flash page with some information, and then but there's another link on the flash page. It punches you through to the Print Media Archive. And so anybody that goes there, this is a project I've been working on since 2006, and what you find there are links to 14,000 articles, 14,500 articles, which are triaged from professional media, professional press, not fringe, not UAP stuff, not paranormal, not citizen journalism, those sites that you remember came up years ago where anybody could publish stuff. There were lots of articles. I didn't include those. This is mainstream journalists and journalism. 15,000 articles. And in some cases, I've earmarked them when a bunch of them tend to focus on a certain area. And so if you really want to understand generally the history of this, because the book about the last 5 years hasn't been written, eventually I think Richard Dolan will write that book. It'll be the third volume of his UFOs, the National Security State, and he'll write it right after Disclosure, finish it. But you just go back to 2017. And so from 2017 forward, actually make it 2018 because the New York Times articles came out in December 16th, 2017. So it's like 441, 11, 4, 15, 4, 25, 4, 33, a little over 4,000 articles.
Wow.
Have been written about the UAP issue since the New York Times article, and the vast majority of them are related to the unfolding process underway. And so someone can go there and they can just start reading forward. A lot of them are duplicated, but still, different interpretations. And if somebody were to read those 4,000, they would then be in the top 1% of people in the world in terms of understanding what's going on right now. That's why I did this. I did it particularly for members of Congress or staff, as well as journalists who want to get up to speed on this. You cannot follow this by, the odd podcast here, YouTube video there, maybe pickups. You can't. This is a historical process of massive proportions. Okay, so that's the first thing I want to point out. All right. Now, the second thing that will point out, which I have said in, probably 200 podcasts in a row now, is the most important thing I want to say to your listeners today. And it's this. And I'm getting crisper and crisper at it as I do it more and more. Everything that you see happening, from ATIP coming forward to gun camera footage releases, all the legislation, witnesses coming out, formation of stuff at the DOD, all of this has absolutely nothing to do with the U.S. government making the decision that they need to find out what this phenomenon is. Understand it, explain it, because they didn't know. Nothing to do with that. It is about something else entirely. And what it is, and here's the analogy I'm using these days, which I kind of like, is that every 4 years in early November, we elect a president and a president-elect. So the person's not president yet. They're not president until they take the oath of office, which under the Constitution they can't do until January 20. And so between early November and January 20, a lot of money is spent building a huge scaffolding on the west side of the Capitol building, working off the steps, but other stuff, so that a very large audience can watch this formal event on January 20, when the president takes the oath of office and gives a speech, which essentially formalizes that new president's term. All right. Now, the president, they don't have to do this. The president could take the oath of office in the bathroom of the East Wing and that they'd be president, right? But no, we put all this scaffolding together to make this big event because it gives it power. It gives it gravitas. The people are involved. And so it just makes the transition of power a little more appropriate, a little more meaningful. And most people take it for granted. Guess what? Everything that you've been seeing going on, certainly since 2017, is a lot of, and it's not quite as organized as the building of the scaffolding for the inauguration, I can assure you, but all of this stuff and what people are saying and doing in the legislation is all about building a scaffolding, a very substantial scaffolding, which allows a process to take place, which in this case is not the inauguration of a president. It's ending the truth embargo, which can only be done by the president. And the reason that they're having to do this is because the truth embargo has gone on so long and offended so many people and involved so many embarrassments and created so much dilemma and confusion that unless the ending of this embargo is carried out with some thought, just like they put a lot of thought in how they inaugurate a president, right? It's carefully done. Unless it's done that way, the government is going to suffer a much greater blowback, derision, criticism, and upset. The people are going to be more angry. And the government's going to look bad. And so they're going through all of this so that when the president does finally confirm the ET presence, almost certainly in front of a lot of cameras, and the announcement will go around the world, people will be more generous, more understanding, more willing to let bygones be bygones. Fewer careers will be damaged. Fewer legacies will be blackened. It is what I have called 1,000 times. It's not the inauguration of a president. It is a public relations driven extrication project in which the government, by necessity, has to lie its way out from under a far bigger lie to good purpose.
Okay.
And I am willing to grant them that. I'm okay with it. There's just no way that you could build this scaffolding and just say anything or answer every question or be forthright. You've got to pretend that and act as if, oh, yeah, it's time for us to look into this, which is a ruse.
Yeah.
It's a charade, okay? But it is an important charade. It is to end the embargo.
Okay. So they have to start somewhere. They can't.
Yeah. Well, the president could just do it. I mean, President Biden knows he's an ET president. So almost every president is known. Maybe every single president since Truman is known to one way or another. That doesn't mean they could act. Doesn't mean they could get access to programs. Technically, they could always get access to programs if they're willing to pay the political price, if they were willing to do the draconian things that needed to be done. And by and large, they concluded that it wasn't appropriate, wasn't worth it. There were other more important matters to deal with, whatever. They all know. And so the work that I'm doing, and I'm back in DC. I'm opening up my office again. I'm going to be up on the Hill now, being much more the activist than I've been there before, because obviously the whole thing is breaking now. But I am working on a media project that may launch soon in in Los Angeles.
Oh, yeah.
Can't talk about details yet, but
Okay. That was going to be one of my questions that I was going to ask you. Are you at liberty to speak about your new project out of Los Angeles,
not
California?
specifics. But
Okay.
it's modest, but there'll be more to follow, and I think it will be important. But again, it's just the beginning. I think I've been at it for almost 18 months. It's been a very tough road because that's a tough business when it comes to content creation. Believe me, it's not for the faint of heart. So so um, the but what I'm doing is very deliberate. And if I get the, I'm going to be, I think I'm going to get on CNN, MSNBC, and Fox pretty soon. All my colleagues have been on. Why not me, right? Um, and I'm going to be saying a message which may be confusing to some people, but I hope not. And that's this: it's okay to carry both of these two ideas in your head at the same time. One is the government is certainly the government is known about the ET reality, has had tech and body since no later than 47, and has known all along. Okay? And two, that there is a elaborate process underway where the government can finally confirm this, but they cannot be direct or forthright. They have to hedge the truth. They have to dodge. They have to weave. They have to put on a show, because if they don't do that, the thing kind of falls apart. It's like the scaffolding at the inauguration starts falling apart, and people are falling out of their seats and stuff.
Yes,
And you
yes.
don't want that, right? So it's got to be done right. It's okay to carry those two things in your head at the same time.
Okay.
And then the question that I might be asked logically is, okay, but why do you care? Why do you make a thing of this? Why do you care that people need to carry those two things in their head at the same time? And the reason may seem subtle to some people, but not to me. It's, I think, historically important, and I think it will be palliative if the process, if people knew this. In other words, it is a, the ET presence is a profound truth, but another important truth is that the government is trying to end the embargo, and they're doing it this way, and people should know that. In other words, they should know the truth of the process. I don't want the disclosure to finally happen, and a whole bunch of people out there thinking, oh wow, the government finally looked into this phenomena and figured out it was real, and now the president's telling us, because that's a massive lie. In other words, they may need to lie and misrepresent in order to get the embargo over with, in order to build that scaffolding. But ultimately, when it's over, they're going to be asked some tough questions. I may be asking some of them, and these are the questions that, of course, are going to be the reason why they need the public relations. But day two, or day one after disclosure, after the announcement, or they'll probably do it on a Friday, so it'll be 3 days. It'll be Monday, but somebody's going to ask a question. Maybe to the president, maybe to the Secretary of Defense, maybe to the White House briefing press officer. Just curious, ma'am, sir, when did the government know that, in fact, there was non-human intelligence engaging us from somewhere? And when did they actually know this? Answer: 1947. Ooh, really? Yeah, 1947. Okay. Well, sir or ma'am, when did we first have technology that was non-human in origin? Answer: 1947. Well, then, sir, ma'am, uh, why are we only just getting that confirmation now in 2023? Answer: national security. And I can go on. There
Yeah.
are a lot more very tough questions. And
Yeah.
so, to the extent that people understand why they're having to do it this way, when those questions are finally asked, because they understood the truth of the process that leads to getting the truth of the ET, I think you're going to be more reasonable. And I don't want them to be bamboozled into this. In other words, you know, now not everybody's going to hear me. I mean, I don't have that big an audience, but there'll be plenty of people that'll actually go to the rest of their life thinking, "Wow, sometime in around 2019 or 2020, the government had got serious and started examining the phenomenon and discovered they were non-human, and they'll take that to their grave. But it'll be completely bogus. We need to know the truth, and we need to go back in time and correct all of the misrepresentations, not to punish, but to ensure that the history of this is not tainted by the truth embargo itself. Now, there needs to be an entire history of the truth embargo. I want to do a doc about that so bad. We almost had the funding, but pandemic. Uh, the we need to know the history of the truth embargo, right? How it was conducted, how it worked, and so forth. And the history in general has got to be accurate. This is the biggest event in human history, and I think it's important to generations to come
Yeah.
that we have a proper, accurate, truthful history of it because it will be talked about for 1,000 years.
Yes, yes. As that truth embargo, that's part of like would you consider part of like the Robertson panel?
Oh,
Then
there's
there was
many
the
things.
Conduct Committee. I mean, those are just a couple of many, but I understand that
The
these are all
truth
part of the
embargo is like
process.
that scaffolding. The truth is
Yeah,
another. The truth embargo was another scaffolding that was set up. Okay, for different purpose, and it has many parts, many pieces of wood involved. It was a miracle that it worked, but it did. Um, and because the American people were very trusting in their government in the 50s,
yes,
started to erode in the 60s, came back a little bit in the 70s, but they just played upon our allegiance and patriotism and what have you and got away with it for 76 years. But it ends now. It was just announced that Representative Comer, the chairman of the House Appropriations Committee, Oversight Committee, is going to do what he threatened to do. He's going to hold a UAP hearing on July 26th.
oh,
It
excellent.
could go on for 3 days because the Congress is going to remain in session through the 28th, go home on the 29th. We could have 3 days of hearing.
Yeah,
Uh, Again, this would be the first real hearing since 1968. These other things that people keep calling hearings were not really hearings; they were briefings. They were
yeah,
reports to Congress from staffers that were brought up to say what's going on. I don't think they even took an oath. So those are not the hearings that really are UAP hearings.
okay,
So this would be the real deal. Now,
yeah,
I'm surprised at this. The House Oversight Committee is not the correct committee to do this. It should be the House Armed Services or Intelligence, maybe Appropriation. But Mr. Comer is seeing this issue as huge and massive and important, and he has the right to call a hearing if he wants to. So I'm going to be interested in three things. One, um, what will Mark Warner, the chairman of the Senate Intel, preempt this move by the House Oversight Committee and call hearings in the Senate ahead of that, which could very well happen? Two, uh, what witnesses is Representative Comer going to get for this oversight hearing? Because it's not like, unless he's going to file some subpoena people, he doesn't really have enough time, and it would be a massive mistake to do that. He's only going to be able to get the ones that are willing to come or are not being screened off by Arrow. So it'll be interesting to see that. And then thirdly, how well do they conduct themselves in this
okay.
hearing? So,
I'm looking forward to this hearing most certainly.
well, yeah, well, look, the hearings on the UAP subject are going to make some members of Congress incredibly famous. It's going to provide them a whole new career. It may even elect somebody president. They're going to be able to raise gazillion more dollars. So there is a lot riding on who and what is out in front of this issue. And everybody wants a piece of this now. Now, understand, when I entered the field in '96, nobody wanted a piece of it.
I certainly will check that out. And Steve, I certainly also appreciate you coming on and giving us so much information about the progress of disclosure. And from what it sounds like, you're saying the imminence that that the big D is coming sometime very soon. Hopefully, with this 2023 proposal from Senator Mike Rounds and Chuck Schumer with the Unidentified Anomalous Phenomenon Disclosure Act, that will be part of this scaffolding. And we certainly appreciate you coming on. Would you like to, before we close this out, do you want to leave any sort of links or plugs for anything that you're doing other than the Paradigm Research Group, your website? Unfortunately, we just lost audio from Steve. Thank you again, Stephen Bassett, for coming on Not Media and for all your efforts in accomplishing the difficult task of disclosure. Please visit Steve's website at paradigmresearchgroup.org. Thank you all for listening to this episode, and thank you everyone who has chosen a life of service. This is not just military, fire, police, and EMS, but also anyone who has taken their talents and passions and used them for the service and betterment of others and this world. I'm not saying goodbye. I'm saying until next time. This is your host at Not Media, JP, signing off. Stay well, everyone.